Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 139 of Tough to Treat. And this is Erica Mello, one of your co hosts. And if you are listening to this episode when it airs immediately, Susan and I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And this episode is actually a re release of one we did in 2018. If you're new to the podcast, you may not have had a chance to listen to this. And if you have been listening for a long time, I would urge you to listen to this again because I want you to look at it through a different lens. And this is about a fencer, a patient I treated a few years ago, and she suffered from bilateral calf pain. So recently I did the masterclass sessions with the Noy group entitled Less Pain, Better Performance with Laura Mosley and an amazing array of physios and researchers. And it was an eye-opening experience and a lot of new research on cortical body matrix and other great topics. But I want you to, I was thinking when I was listening to these sessions about a lot of athletes that I do treat. And I want you to think about this particular patient who is a fencer or any recreational athlete, or if you're working with elite athletes, or anybody who's active, right? You want to think about how can you change the context of the movement or movements that you were trying to work with them on. So, but this particular patient, it was, a lot of the on guard position in fencing, right? How can you change the context of the movement patterning? Obviously you can't do it with your eyes closed here, but in some movements you can do eyes open, eyes closed. You can change, center of mass, wide versus normal, quote unquote, or narrow. Susan and I talk a lot about that, how changing center of mass really challenges the movement system, right? And, same movements, but different contexts. That one of the speakers who works with musicians on this masterclass, she talked about having some of her musicians play pieces very fast. And I thought that was a fantastic idea. You're just changing things up. And I'm treating an equestrian right now, and she's also a musician. And she's a little bit hypervigilant. So I am at the point now where I'm actually having her do her exercises to a metronome. And it actually really soothes her. So, and it changes how her nervous system and how she moves. So I would urge you to think about when you're listening to this episode or any other patients that you have of how you can do this, how you can sort of change things up. Because you'll be at the tail end of the program, I think, at this point, right? And you've been sort of moving them along, and you really want to think about let's mix it up a bit, and let's train the brain and challenge the movement system a bit. So we hope you enjoy the episode. And we also, Susan and I, would love for any of our listeners who have not yet left us a review on Apple Podcasts or any platform where you do listen to our podcast, if you could leave us a testimonial or a review. It would only take less than a minute. We would truly appreciate it. It really helps us with the algorithms on all of these sites, and we really enjoy reading them, and we do read all of them actually. So thank you again in advance. And on to the episode. Hey everybody, this is Erica Mello with my co-host Susan Clinton, and thank you for listening to Tough to Treat. Hey Susan, how are you today?
I'm good, Erica. How are you today?
I am good, very good. I think we have an interesting case today. So I know we've been going back and forth with some really interesting patients. This current person I'm actually treating her now. So it seems, looking back on the podcast, I see a lot of young kids, it seems like, or I'm actually picking young kids for these interesting podcasts, but I actually do treat older people, but this girl is actually 16.
Okay.
So she is a fencer. So I've gotten to treat a couple of fencers. Have you ever treated a fencer before?
I have not. I was just sitting here thinking, I'm reminding myself what fencing looks like. And I've been exposed to it, and it's an amazing sport.
It really
amazing
is.
sport, yeah.
It's a lot of agility. I actually went to visit not her session because she wasn't really fencing, but somebody else's session here in New York City. And I videoed using that new Huddle app that I learned at Shirley Starman's course in St. Louis. So
And it's amazing how these kids, it's a lot of it's agility, but then you watch, like, two of the teachers are Olympians, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
watch their footwork, and all of these young kids are getting a lot of foot problems because
Interesting.
when they go back and
Mm-hmm.
forth, back and forth, back and forth, they're always
Right.
coming up on their left leg, on their basically lifting their left heel up as they're lunging forward.
Mm-hmm.
The Olympians don't do that. They evert the
Oh,
foot, they fan the foot, and they're going back and forth. So it's quite interesting watching that because,
that's a kind of a balance issue in so many ways.
right?
Looking at balance, looking at agility, and looking at the combination on a straight line movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's in trying to figure out how to handle your body weight moving over the foot on that straight
Yep.
line.
Yep. Yep.
Interesting.
No, it's quite interesting. So this girl, she's 16, as I mentioned. She has bilateral calf pain. That's her gig. All right. She's got some numbness. Not really. It was not a major, you know, thing in her presentation. An occasional leg buckling, not also major. I tend to ask those questions. She didn't really volunteer that, but it was mostly the calf pain. I started seeing her at the beginning of December. And she had been seen by a physical therapist that works with the fencing club here in the city. And she wasn't getting better. And she had an MRI, which didn't really show anything. Okay. I mean, for 16, I mean, what do you expect? Right. I mean,
Right.
it's not going to. So this, apparently this prior therapist had been treating her as if she had a herniated disc. So we're doing a
Okay.
lot of like extensions,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of McKenzie, some strength training, things like that. I mean, nothing really rocket science. I mean, nothing really outstanding, like just basic. And I think they were being treated in the facility, so I don't think they had access to a lot of equipment. So it was mostly just extensions and some probably just strength training for her legs
Did the
or
ex-
calves.
did the extension exercises decrease your calf pain?
No, it made it worse actually.
Okay.
So the she started, basically her history is in July of 2016 she started fencing very seriously, and I mean, these kids fence like 5 days a week. It's crazy. And then they do other strength training within the facility. Other than that, she doesn't do anything, recreationally. So she's a student, and that was her main issue. October 2016, 3 months later, the pain in her calves started. So she basically had physical therapy for almost a year and wasn't getting any, long-term relief or anything that really carried over. I think she had good days and bad days, but it always kept coming back. So she had no other major health issues. She did have a history of, some psychological issues and things like that. But other than that, she seemed very sort of healthy emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
And the main thing that bothered her was running, jumping. That's it, running and jumping, and fencing, obviously, with all that agility work. The only thing that made her feel better was lying on her back. So the issue was the calf pain and also the heaviness in her legs. So I said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So I basically took a look at her, and I mean, she would get some occasional night pain, but I don't think that really was an issue. She'd been worked up and had the MRI, as I mentioned, which didn't find anything. So the big thing I noticed with her is that she stood in a significant amount of lordosis in her lumbar spine. I mean, it was just like, stick that butt out, and there she was. And her paraspinals were just gripping like crazy. And I'm like sitting there thinking, she's 16. She doesn't have a herniated disc. Why does she have calf pain? I mean, right? She's a fencer. I did some general listening, as per the Bilateral courses. And
I just have to tell you, I'm biting my fingers to keep quiet because
okay, well, I'll let you,
too. No, go ahead.
I'll let you talk.
This is fascinating.
So I did a general listening, and it went right to her head, like it was almost going down her dural tube. Like I put the hand on the head, did the fascial load, and then all of a sudden it went down, 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 down. And I'm like, oh, could be spinal, could be cranium. I don't know. I'm going to stop my, I'm not going to do my bias. So right from that history, before I tell you what I sort of found, what do you think?
Well, I'm just listening to this and I'm thinking about a 16-year-old with bilateral calf pain.
Mm-hmm.
you know, who's doing, and I'm picturing fencing and seeing, you know, the postures for performance that are required in fencing. And I'm thinking, you know, a 16-year-old and a disc just doesn't jive.
Mm-mm.
You know, it just doesn't. And it doesn't sound like it's nerve root stuff. I mean, you know,
Mm-mm.
this is kind of interesting. So my first thought when I start thinking about, you know, people this age group is I start thinking about, you know, spondylolisthesis or hypermobility syndrome.
Exactly.
You know, it's like, wow. And especially, and then when you said the gripping of the extensor muscles, it's like she's trying like anything she can to pull herself out of lordosis.
Absolutely.
You know,
Right.
if you've got a segment that's really, you know, in trouble there or sensitized there, you know, that, and that would make sense why when she lays down, laying on her back, it feels better. Why? Because when she lays on her back, gravity assists everything to kind of just move from that anterior to posterior direction. So
Mm-hmm.
it,
Mm-hmm.
and plus she's not weight bearing. So,
Exactly.
you know, it alleviates the sensitization of the osteochondral features that may be part of this if it is a
Mm-hmm.
spondy.
Right. Exactly. So that's exactly what I thought. I'm like, she's got to be
Mm-hmm.
hypermobile. She has to be. She just looked it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just took a look at her again in standing, and I'm like, I wasn't going to go in. Sometimes I can tend to go down the route of, well, she's got this shift, she's got that shift. The biggest thing was that she was gripping these paraspinals. She was in the
Mm-hmm.
lordosis. I said, let me. She's like, during the whole process, she was like, you know, they were telling me my calves were weak and I was strengthening my calves, and I'm like just looking at her trying to like keep being, you know, I don't want to, above all, I don't want to tell her that she wasted a year of her life not getting the proper treatment, because that's definitely not helpful.
No.
But so I was trying to explain to her that, you know, they could be weak. I haven't tested them, but I think ultimately you really want to find the source of the problem. And she got it. I mean, she's
Mm-hmm.
pretty smart kid. So I had her move. I said, let me just see how she moves. So I had her, since she was in that lordosis, I'm like, can you do a back bend for me? Just stand and back bend. I mean, she was back bending so far I had to stop her. I was like, she was so
Yeah.
hypermobile, which I expected. But I needed just to confirm that. And she's like, oh, I'm, you know, and I'm like, see all those extensions you were doing? You probably did them very well. Because you can do that very well.
Yeah, that's a movement pattern that she has. That one's there.
Yep. And then I said, well, you know, just to confirm this, just can you bend forward? And I mean, this is like no problem, right to the floor. So I said, okay, I don't need to test anything else in her lumbar spine. She's hypermobile. So what I ended up doing is I got her on the table, and to confirm generalized hypermobility, I went in, I checked her hips. I mean, she was all over the place. Her external rotation in her shoulders was like, I don't know, 100. I mean, it was more than a baseball pitcher. I mean, so she had generalized hypermobility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I took a look at her. I did some dural testing just to do it. I did the slump test. I did all of that, and I didn't find anything, and I didn't
Right.
expect to find anything.
Mm-hmm.
But just to do my due diligence, I did that. And I mean, her straight leg raise, I mean, her hamstrings were like 9. I mean, it was like 110, and she was so flexible. So then I turned her over, and I did sort of a classic Maitland, because I wanted to see what her accessory joint mobility felt like. If she truly was really joint, she was hypermobile. So I basically did some, you know, the PAVMs, passive accessory vertebral mobility testing, and
Mm-hmm.
I went through her whole spine. She was, I mean, I could have bounced a ball off her back. She was so flexible. I mean, she had a lot of mobility in her lumbar spine and a
Mm-hmm.
lot in her thorax. So I said to her, I said, let me have you stand up again. So I don't know what else you would have done. I just did that because I kind of funny feeling. I knew it was hypermobility issue. So what I can tell you what I did. You go ahead.
Were her hamstrings
I mean, she was about 100, maybe 110, but they were not as bad.
Because usually the thing that, you know, they always say is, you know, they have the kids with the hypermobility syndrome, the back pain, and some of the stuff, and the first thing they send them to PT for is to, you know, their hamstrings are tight, lengthen their hamstrings, and it's like their hamstrings are the only thing that's holding them together.
Correct.
Generally, that's why I was wondering if hers were, you know, it sounds like they're, you know, although they're above 90, probably for somebody with hypermobility syndrome, you would expect the hamstrings to be, you know, her be able to bring her ankle up to her ear,
right?
You know, but the hamstrings tend to be that muscle that just tends to overwork, over-recruit, kind of like the extensors.
Correct.
You wonder about those calves too.
I know. I went in and I do see that as well as a clinical pattern in people who are very hypermobile. The calves and the hamstrings tend not as stiff, or stiffer than other muscles, because they are. It's the only thing that is holding them together. To be honest, you're right. So with her, that was the case, but she still was somewhat flexible. But for her, that was probably stiff. So what I did is I had asked her in the history, in the year that she, before she came to see me, if she ever had put a lumbar support on, just anything. And she said she had. And I think her mother had gotten her a belt, and she said it actually did help me. I said, how come you didn't continue with that? And she said, oh, I don't know. And she's 17 or 16, so so she's not going to walk around, public school in New York City with a lumbar support on her, or a belt. So what I did is, in standing, since her hypermobility was so pronounced, because she had a problem running and she had a problem walking, I said, you know what, I'm not going to have you run or just watch you walk. I'm just going to just watch you squat, just to see how you move, and I watched her squat, and she almost hinged like at L2-3. It was like she squatted and she went into this extreme lordosis, and she was hinging, like it was almost like, I'm using my hands here, but it was almost like she went right, she went left. She went right, she went left, and she was not stable at all, or not, I don't want to say stable, she was not moving well. It was poorly controlled. So and she's sort of like, oh, that feels kind of funky, and that feels weird, and my calves hurt. And squatting is something she doesn't do, and it's something that, as I said, is not related for me to running or walking. It's not typically what I would look at. But with her, even in standing, she was using that strategy. And I said, let me see how she, instead of, once again, not wanting her to run, I said, let me just have her move. So she squatted, and that's what I saw. So I applied just some compressions to the front and the back of her pelvis. So I started off with, I had my hands on top of the iliac crest. I moved down, and then I just applied it's almost like I was applying like a pelvic belt or a lumbar support posteriorly. So I did posterior compression. Okay. So then she squatted, and she was like, oh, that feels better. But she was still doing this sort of hingy thing.
Wiggle waggle.
Wiggle waggle. Then I said, let's start up. So then I did the opposite. I gave her some compression or support anteriorly. And she squatted, and she was like, oh, that feels so much better. I did not see the wiggle waggle.
Interesting.
Yes. So in how I know this to be, and how I was taught, that when you sort of give them posterior compression like that, that mimics the use of your posterior chain, glutes, paraspinals, calves, whatever. But those were already turned on for her. So it didn't surprise me that did not work as well. Then I went in and did the front, and the anterior compression. How I was taught is that mimics anterior chain, maybe pelvic floor, abdominal muscles, things like that. So she felt a lot better. So what I did, because I didn't have time to do like a full treatment. Her history was so long. I ended up taping her, and I taped her into anterior compression. So I used the Hypafix and the Leukotape. I just take the Hypafix and put it around the iliac crest and on both sides. If anybody has a question about that, I can pop a photo up, and show you how I did that. And then I just have a Leukotape, and then I just sort of basically compressed her that way. So she basically had two pieces of Hypafix on one side, on the right side, one side of the Hypafix, other side Hypafix, and then Leukotape on top. Almost like she was putting a belt on, but it wasn't really coming around from her back.
Yeah, very interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Speaking about posterior chain, anterior chain activation, a lot of what you see was kind of a clinical pattern. When they're really overgripping their extensors, means that, take it for however way you want it, but probably the abdominal wall is not, it's getting inhibited a bit, and so for whatever reason, with a hypermobile person, or a person who has a lot of joint mobility, they're on that really Gumby scale end of things. you do see some under recruitment of muscles and over recruitment of muscles. And I
Yes.
love the way that you came around in front and did some inward compression at the iliac crest. And, when you think about, the anterior chain and the posterior chain, what I love about coming into the anterior part of the iliac crest, or the front part of that, with that bit of compression or that bit of input, which is exactly what that tape was. You just took the tape and said, just get in here and give some sensory input, like my hands would be,
Right.
to see if it would carry over well. And I really think the other piece that really gets that we forget about is that the glute max is an external rotator, but it also works with the glute med. And when you come in on that side, those side walls, and compress anteriorly, it's almost like you're firing up or charging or saying to the glute med, hey guys, let's work. And then the glute max is like, I'm here too. We can all work together. And, definitely that whole anterior chain is a piece of it, because if you stand backwards, you're going to have, I think Shirley Sarman explains it best, a spring that's getting sprung in the front,
Right.
So the
Yep.
abdominal wall, although it's probably very strong and it's got good turgor to it, the spring is getting sprung because it's continually put into a lengthened position. So it's developing
Correct.
all the sarcomeres in, I always forget if it's parallel, along the lengthening of
Yes.
what's happening. So it gets to the point where it's not going to recruit well.
Yep.
If you put her in a flex position, she probably would have difficulty rolling like a ball, because you are asking those sarcomeres that are already lengthened to have to shorten and work. And, so this is very fascinating, starting from the beginning like that and seeing where she is, and how can you make a change with where she is right now, standing in front of you on the clinic. And I love that, because going home and doing sit-ups, okay, well, you have a weak abdominal wall. Well, I don't think it's weak. I just think it's long.
Exactly.
So how do we get, how do we start the recruitment process in something she's going to do every day? I love that you started her in standing. I just love it.
Yeah, no, it was very interesting because she does have strong abdominals. And she's like, oh, they always tell me I have strong abdominals. I said, but you're not really using them appropriately.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to explain to her in her term that I said, your strategy right now is to hang on to those paraspinals in your back. And that is why you did not get better prior, because you were just reinforcing a very poor movement pattern, okay, that you can easily go into extension. So, and that lengthens the front of your abdomen. So I think she got that. And I would agree with you that I think a lot of people who, they tend to do all these deep abdominals and things like that. And they may be very strong, but they're either, number one, not using them appropriately, or they're just overworking them with the wrong task. I mean, I said to her, you don't need to have your paraspinals turned on waiting at the line at the post office. You really don't, okay? Right. And so what I did was I wanted to just give her something, because she had just been so desperate. I think her mother was there as well. So anyway, so that's what I did the first visit. And I was thinking maybe of doing some Pilates things with her, because we have some equipment in the office, and she actually lives in a really nice building here in New York that has a huge gym and Pilates equipment in the gym in the building.
Wow.
So I was like, where do you live? Because that's fabulous.
I want to move there. Yeah.
I know, right? So that was the first visit. So I didn't give her, I said, she's like, should I use my lumbar support? I said, if you want. I said, if it helped you, absolutely, So she came back, I'm just looking at my notes here. She came back, I think, a week later. And I basically told her, she goes, should I practice my squats? I said, if you want to practice your squat, that's great. You need a mirror, because you're sort of hinging there, and you're doing this wiggle waggle. And she's like, okay, I'll try. And she was very willing to do it. So she came back, and she said that her calves were feeling a lot better. And I was like, what? I was just like, with one little piece of tape, that can't be. That always worries me after the first visit. I don't know about you, but it always one visit and you feel a lot better. I don't know, that, as I said, that just, prior experience has told me that sometimes that's not always the best scenario, but she did feel better. And what I thought I would do, because I had the time to spend with her, and I devoted the full hour, for her, that I still was being pulled into her head. And I sometimes with these patients who've had hypermobility, who have some, prior emotional issues, I tend to do a little bit of some craniosacral work just because I've seen it help people like that, especially with people who've had some emotional issues in the past. This girl's been adopted, and she also had some issues of hurting herself over the years. And I just felt that that was something I wanted to do, okay, as a little experiment, to be honest. So
Mm-hmm.
I started with a protocol I used. I did not go through the whole upledger craniosacral protocol. I ended up taking some craniosacral work with a woman by the name of Doreen Killens. I don't know if you know her. She's
Mm-hmm.
up in Montreal, and I've taken a couple courses with her. So that's what I did in like for 15 minutes in the second session. And then what I ended up doing, I reinforced the tape, and then I got her on the Pilates equipment, and I started doing some, I don't know if you're familiar with some of like the box work, like
Mm-hmm.
okay, so I had her in just seated first, okay, just having her do seated push downs to see if she could just not slump and not and recruit that abdominal wall. She was okay with that. Then I had her do some pikes. I had her go in, put her hands on top of the box, put her feet on the part of the box that goes up. So she's almost doing like a prone pike, trying to lift her legs up by
Yep.
recruiting her abdominals in the flexed position.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a little bit of trouble with that, and I actually
Not
tried that
surprising.
yeah, and I tried that myself. I'm like, there is no way that I could even do that, because I come sometimes demo. I mean, I always demo, but I'm like, I don't think I can demo this because I don't think I can do this. So I tried, but to no avail. That was not something I could do. So she tried, and so you could see her really gripping her back, and
Mm-hmm.
so with that flexed posture, like you had mentioned, she couldn't do it. She
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do it. So we started working a little bit on that. Then I had her go into the Cadillac, had her
Mm-hmm.
just do some little bit of like roll downs with her, trying to get into that flex posture, getting into the abdominal wall, and then having her sort of come back up into like a little bit more of a flex posture. I don't know if people are familiar with the Cadillac in Pilates, but you have like a bar with springs, and you're just sort of leaning back and rolling down and then coming back up. I had her do a little bit of that as well, just to try to reinforce that
Mm-hmm.
that that position in that
Yeah,
flex.
that's nice. For those who don't understand that, what she's doing is she's on her back and her arms are up on a bar that is spring loaded, so you can adjust the loading. And how much it's loaded tells you how much they have to work. But what it ends up doing is a lot of eccentric
Yeah,
control of the abs, which is really, really nice for somebody who's got a very long abdominal wall. It helps them begin to change that pattern a little bit, and they have to change it as they actually do the one thing which is difficult for them is recruit as they move into extension.
yeah,
And it's a tricky thing to get, but that's wonderful
yeah.
that you started with that, because that would make a ton of sense to me, especially as she moves into extension, because that's what she needs to have some different strategies around, because the extension strategy for her has been self-limiting,
Right, right,
for her
exactly.
problems.
Yeah, so I did that, and she took that and you know did that at home as well. Then we have a TRX, so I had her do an assisted squat with the TRX, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see if she, by putting her arms out and holding on the TRX handles, if she could squat without the hinge, without
Mm-hmm.
the wiggle waggle. And she could do it better. Yes, she had her tape on. She could do it better. So I was trying to explain to her what I was seeing. And I said, I don't need you to recruit your abdominal wall like you're sucking your guts in or anything like that. I need to see if you can squat and control the movement in your back. And I filmed it. So I took my iPhone and I just had her squat, and she saw that, and we watched it over and over again. Then I had her do the TRX again. Then she squatted, and she was able to control it a lot better. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if there's any cues or how you would have explained it. Because I had the video, she got it.
Yeah,
So,
picture's worth
you
a
know,
thousand words, right?
yeah,
The only thing I would have added, or maybe done just a little bit different, is the strategy I learned from you many podcasts ago. I would have probably had her look at her head and see how her head was moving.
yes,
Because sometimes that translates up to the head, and sometimes it doesn't.
yes,
And I know that if it was probably you thought that she could control it that way, you probably would have pulled that in because that was your trick. there. The other thing is that I would have probably added a little exhalation to it. A
Yes.
little bit of the blow through the straw, kind
On
of
the squat
on
or
the
on the
squat
squat?
down. And it's interesting because a lot of people will say pelvic floor wise, you probably should inhale on the squat. But if they're having trouble recruiting and controlling all the way down, that gentle exhale can kind of help automate that whole internal stuff. A little bit of pelvic floor, a little bit of ab, a
Love
little
it.
less gripping of the back, and make sure that they're just not cutting off and overusing their diaphragm. And the only reason I would bring that up is because if she's hanging around and moving a lot around L1, L2, that's
Hmm.
where the diaphragm attaches in. And so it may be an over
Yes.
recruitment process of the diaphragm to do some locking or moving on these things. And interesting fencers, because they wear masks, and
Right.
it'd be like, wow, I need a camera inside their mask now if I ever look at one, because I want to make sure they're not holding their breath,
Yeah.
because they're balancing and working and trying for that precision and target practice and, the whole thing. And I'm wondering if she had a little breath holding piece that was going on, but I would have just added a little all I would have done was add, a little bit more of a controlled exhale
I like that. I'm
with
actually,
that. Yeah, something that you could do with the Pilates, with any of the stuff, is that kind of like breath out,
yeah, that's a
with
great
the
idea.
exertion part, just to see if that, might be a cue that would help her automate. But it would certainly make sure that that diaphragm wasn't overworking like a postural control muscle.
Oh, I love it. That's great. So I will look at
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm actually seeing her soon, so I will look at that.
Yeah, it'd be exciting to
Um,
hear.
yeah, oh, I love that. I sometimes forget the breath work, and because I'm so fixated, you get so caught. You're like, oh, it's the paraspinals, and she's squatting, and then she's
Uh-huh.
moving. But that's great because she definitely, I mean, her abdominals, once again, are not bad, but when she has to recruit them in different postures, they're not that great. And with fencing, you need to be able to move in and out of postures
Right.
very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And if you're
And
stuck in one, it's going to make your transitions that much harder.
exactly. So that's what I did on the second visit. And I sent her home again with tape on, and she came in third visit. I'm going to sort of go along here. She said she was getting a lot better. She had one bad day, I think, and I don't know why, but I think she said she was sick. I'm not sure. She just said she felt a lot better. Her calf pain was improving. I did similar things to the prior visit. But then I also had her get back on the Cadillac, and they're called candlesticks on the Cadillac, where you're lying down, you're gripping the bars behind you. It's almost like you're doing a reverse crunch. Your legs are up in front of you. So I flexed her from below, lying on her back, she got a double straight leg raise. She's pushing up on a bar, pushing up. It's almost like a reverse crunch push up, right? So supine, hands gripping the bars, straight, both legs straight up, and then pushing on a bar hanging over, just pushing up like that. And she did that, and I gave her some resistance with the springs and things like that. Still almost in that little bit of a flex posture, but not as much as the pike on the box.
Yeah.
And we ended up doing a lot of that, just very similar. I progressed her squat. I had her get on like a foam pad with the TRX just to see if she could stabilize on a little bit more of an unstable surface on the foam pad versus standing on the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
I still did the craniosacral work just because I did. I wanted to do that. I sometimes I don't think that is there a clinical reasoning why I did that? No, it's clinical expertise. It's something that I've seen help in kids who have these issues, and it certainly wasn't making her worse. If anything, it may have been helping.
I'd like to just jump in on that, because I know there's a lot of people who run up and down the aisles, screaming about techniques and styles and things like that. But, I like the idea that you spent time with her. I don't care what people want to say about this or that. That's not interesting me. What interests me is when you have somebody and they're on the table and you put your hands in a light and meaningful way on their system, you're interacting with their neurological system.
Yep.
And I think more than anything, when you have somebody who's got a history like this young lady who's had, she's had a history of just a lot of different things in her life. And one of them that, of hurting herself is not, that's a sympathetic overdrive. There's a component to that. And, this whole pain piece, maybe there's a thing about her pain that she needs to hold on to. You know, I mean, like you said, you were a little worried, like, woo, her pain went away that fast. Wow. You know, and it's not so much to be worried, but it becomes a, like, what is a yellow flag, psychosocial overlay, perhaps,
Yep.
that, you know, you certainly don't want to transfer dependence, you know, from what was happening there to now to me. I'm the only one who can fix you. That's not it. But what you were doing was just giving her enough input to her system. You empowered her to feel better, but then you reinforced it by, you know, you really deserve to lay down and be quiet and just feel this input and just know that you're safe. And I think a lot of times, you know, by doing that, and the breath work helps with that too, is that just begins to give people, it turns their sympathetic system down a little bit. It's just like taking the switch and just clicking it off a little bit and allowing the other systems, now that that sympathetic goes down a bit, then your vagal and some of the other systems can come up. And it changes recruitment patterns. We know this all the time in pelvic floor, over recruitment, pelvic pain. You know, people laugh at me all the time, but I'm up at the neck. You know, it's like because they're over recruiting their occipital muscles and all those muscles between, you know, the occiput and C2, all the suboccipital muscles. And I just want to get those muscles to learn to like lengthen. You know, you don't need to be clamped down in overdrive all the time. And I love that you did that, because that's a piece that probably nobody ever really did with her, was just to, you know, you have the power to be quiet and to be safe.
Right.
You know, and to work in a different way than you've ever worked before. And I think that's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
And
for her, I just, you know, I think clinical expertise is very important. And I think that, you know, we don't need to point to a bazillion research studies, although I love research, but I think it's the clinical expertise is important. And I think that people underestimate a lot of that. And if you see a pattern, you know, pattern recognition, that's something I tend to go with. And especially with her, it sounds crazy, but I just felt like I needed to do that with her and just get my hands in there and just turn the lights down in the room and just have a nice conversation with her. And I continue to do that. I continue to do that with her to this day. So, and it's not a big deal. Doesn't really take much time for me at this point. So I think her nervous system just needs to calm down a bit. I mean, she comes in and she's great. I mean, you look at all she's been through, and in her, even prior to the calf pain, with her familial history and such. I think that these kids need to, you know, just need to have a little novel input, as you said, into their nervous system. And,
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I also kind of find it interesting that who chose fencing?
You know, I don't know. It's funny because it's a great idea. I have to ask her that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I you know, because it's you know, fencing is, I mean, it's a traditional way of battle, you know, where
I love that.
She didn't choose dance, you know, she chose, you know, or you know, it'd be interesting to see who chose that, but she's obviously embraced it.
I know. I mean,
so,
absolutely.
You know, but you think about a little bit of her history, and then you think about fencing as her choice. It's kind of like,
I never thought of that. That's a great idea. You know, I will ask her. I will definitely ask her.
Yeah, it'd just be, you know, I wouldn't counsel her out of it. I would just kind of be like,
yeah,
you know,
she really likes it. I mean, she is,
and exploring some other ways. I love the idea that she's got a plot, you know, some exercise equipment in her building, and you're giving her some new ways to move, which again, like anything, especially when it comes to kids, you know, and 16-year-old, I'm sorry, is still a kid. You know, she's not a, you know, 28-year-old woman. She's a 16-year-old teenager. You know, that pattern, getting in that pattern and fencing, although there's stuff that has to go, it's predominantly a sagittal plane pattern. And, you know, giving her the ability to move out of that sagittal plane and train in other ways is going to be huge. We all know that cross training is, you know, what she needs. And it's great because some of the things that you're getting her to do is recruiting in that same plane for her sport, but you're also, by squatting and giving her some different things to do, you're starting to take her out of it. It'll be interesting to see how she had, because I know you're going to be doing rotation soon.
That's funny.
I know you. Yeah, I just know you. And it's going to be interesting to see how she can cope with it. You know, how does that feel and work, you know, with her system? Because, she'll, I know that you're going to be taking her into a lot more transverse plane motions as you
Yeah.
move forward with her.
So that's exactly what I did. So I am just looking at the notes here. I'm going to combine a few visits. I progressed everything on the Pilates equipment, and then I had her just start with, we have a sports cord, like a huge, cord. I ended up having her to just do some forward walks, really pulling hard as she was trying to walk down the track, to sort of get in that flex posture and really recruit the anterior chain. I had her do that. She had some difficulty, literally. I had 3 cords around her. I had a cord around her, under her chest, her midriff, and then on her leg. So it was almost like a three cords. And I was, because I wanted her to see if she could recruit the whole, not just the abdominals. So I had that, and she had a hard time. So I took one off. I forgot which one I took off, but I didn't write it down. But then I had her forward bend and walk again, and she did it a lot better. So I started doing that. And then I started her doing a little bit of, I didn't want her to do a full lunge, because I was trying to progress that forward motion with that one leg that she does in fencing. So I had her do a little bit of a mini lunge with rotation, but I made her hold a weight in her hand. So what I had her do was, I said, you need something in front of your body to cause your nervous system to say, oh, I need to recruit anterior chain a bit. I need to recruit abdominals. So I tried 15 pounds, which was too hard for her. Normally I wouldn't start that high, but I've had her put 10 pounds short lever, holding it close to her. Okay. Then she did a teeny, mini lunge with the right leg. I said, just rotate to the right, then step back, do with the left. And after 5, she wasn't getting any calf pain or anything. She's like, this is really hard. I said, well, now hold it out, hold the weight out in a longer lever position, to sort of recruit more. And she thought it was really quite hard for her to do. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I put the weight in there just to give her brain something to say, oh, I got to do something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I do. And it's always interesting because you're working with novel movements with her, so you don't know how much is going to be too challenging for her system and how much isn't. I think it's okay to make mistakes like that, because you see that, okay, she's having difficulty handling this type of position and movement with this weight. And that just shows you that, okay, we just need to scale it. The movement is learned from trial and error. And error detection and error control, that's motor control. Go back to your Shumway cookbooks and, and read. That was their big paradigm shift from, neurodevelopmental technique, was that error control and, error detection and error control through the cerebellum is how we learn to move. And you're giving her new skills, so she's not going to be great at them, and it's not that she doesn't have the strength to do it. She doesn't have the, it's the coordination motor control that she's developing. And sometimes with people like that, you need to throw a little bit more at them, see how they handle it, and then back off and change. And it's interesting because the rotation, she kind of fell apart a little bit with, and I, that's why I was laughing earlier, because I said, I know Erica's going to go right into rotation at some point, because that's exactly what I would do too. Because I'll tell you, when you really want to, once you get that anterior chain going, which is what you've done, and all those different postures, which is amazing. So it's not just like, oh, I'm only teaching her to pike and recruit her abs, and so she walks around in a pike position. No, that's not what you were after. You were just after, can we change the movement patterns and get some new ones in? But when you begin to start adding rotation, then you start to get across the anterior chain. So you start recruiting in diagonals across the anterior chain. And I think that's important, because I think we forget that, once you put the weight in there and you had her do a mini lunge and rotate, you're requiring the obliques to fire in different directions and in different ways. And that was new. It's new for her, but it's great, because now I want to back up just a little bit. The Olympians who don't go on their toes, but manage this rotation. So what the Olympians are doing is they've put rotation into their program.
Oh yeah.
They're rotating. If they're everting and inverting their foot and doing those kinds of wonderful things, they're setting rotation up through the transverse plane. And, and of course it's more difficult for kids. When you're doing all that high level activity, and that's why they're Olympians. Because they better be able to rotate and do all of those great movements, to manage to stay on that one line, but be able to manipulate their body all the way around their feet.
Yes, and move very quickly when someone's
Yeah,
attacking them with a saber, right?
yeah.
And I watched this Olympian train, I mean, at the facility, and I was so shocked at the fact that and I said to him, I said, how come you don't lift your back foot up? He's
Hmm.
like, oh, it helps keep me balanced. That's
Yeah,
exactly what he said.
you
And
know,
I was like, you know what? That's why these people are Olympic athletes,
that's
because
right.
they know what to do.
Ground floor reactions and rotation around the transverse, plane.
Right.
Man,
Exactly.
fabulous.
So I love that. And so I continued along with that. And then I, the last, so this is the last visit. I'm still treating her. So this last visit, I saw her just recently, and progressed things. What I ended up doing, I had her do some star lunges as well. Lunge here, lunge like
Hmm.
in a clock,
Sure.
12, 9, 3, that type
Hmm.
of thing. Had her do that. I progressed the sports cord. I ended up doing more the TRX. I had her get on a Bosu ball to do the TRX to see if she could stabilize. But what I also started doing, and I'd love your thoughts on this, this is something I read years ago. I think it was maybe out of Paul Hodges' research. I tried to work that feed forward mechanism of her brain, because they
Hmm.
say that the reaction time with people who have significant low back issues have poor reaction time. So I
Right, right.
basically we have some kettlebell bells and just heavier sort of weighted balls. I basically had her stand there. I stood above her on like a little step, and I just literally dropped a ball in her hands.
Hmm.
Weighted ball. I mean, we started
Hmm.
with 4 or 5 to see if she could stabilize, to see if she wouldn't like sort of let the ball drop and have her come back up into extension, right?
Right.
So I had her do that with her eyes opened, and I
Hmm.
had her do that with her eyes closed.
I
And
think those are, yeah, I love
so
it.
you let me know. That's the last thing. That's the last new thing I've done with
Well,
her.
that, one of her problems is, I'm looking back at my list here, is running and jumping.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing is you're training the system to be automatic so it can handle those quick movements.
Right.
I think that's great,
Yeah.
because that's you're requiring the system to do something quickly.
Yep.
And so rather than having her jump, which brought her symptoms on, figure out another way to, and a lot of people will say, okay, if they can handle it from above, what about if I come straight at them? What if
Right.
about I come to the side? Then you're starting to add rotation in. And then
Right.
it's kind of like, can we do it while we're walking? Now can we just like run a little bit and see what
Yeah.
happens? But you're basically training that system to cope with itself under quick movements, which it had lost the ability to do if she was having trouble with running and jumping.
Right. And so it was more just try to train that automatic
Yeah, yeah.
process. So that's where I ended up with her. What I think my impression is that a lot of these kids or general people with hypermobility tend to do better when you add some resistance to their
Mhm.
movements, okay?
Mhm.
Because it gives that brain, oh, I need to fire something.
Mhm.
And that's why I progressed to the weights, the heavy weights with her.
Mhm.
And I feel now that I need to sort of get her, my last note I wrote, to work more fencing patterns in.
Mhm.
And that's sort of where I'm at. I don't know if you have any other suggestions or where you would go, but that's where I'm at with her now. She's doing a lot better, but she needs to go back to fencing.
Yeah,
So
she definitely needs to. That's why I said find out where
yeah,
fencing came from.
yeah, yeah,
Because there's always that issue: is this something that she feels like she's supposed to do, or is this
right,
something that she feels like she really wants to do?
right,
There's always that little piece, and that kind of helps them wrap their head around how
mm,
they approach return to sport a little bit. It's like if she can figure out that she wants to do this, she's more likely to be successful as you begin to work those things in, which is really good. The rotation is the only other thing, and I know you're already
yeah,
going there, so
yep,
it'd be
yeah,
kind of cool to figure out if you can help her keep her back foot down.
I know.
Pick up a little of those ticks and trips and ticks.
Yeah.
Tricks and tips.
Yep.
My goodness. But it'd be kind of fun to maybe even just, have a conversation with their coach.
You know what? It's interesting. Her coach is no longer there.
Ah,
Yes, he does not work there anymore. So she's not sure if she wants to stay in that same fencing club or not. So,
okay.
um, but yes, whatever coach she gets,
Yeah.
I would definitely do that.
Mm-hmm.
And some people say hypermobility is tough to treat, but I think that if you figure out a few things, it becomes really a lot of fun. I'm
Yeah.
having a grand old time treating her. I love it.
Yeah. It's
I really
a
do.
challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge. It's fun to challenge their system.
Yes.
And she's young. That's the thing about it is they're young. They can cope with the changes. They just need to be put in situations where they're neurologically they need to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not
Yeah.
do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. And
So, which is really nice.
Yeah, and she's very sort of like when I'm doing exercises with her, after I tape her and we get out of the room, she's like, how many reps, how many sets? She's very sort of organized in her brain that way. And I'm like, never count. I'm just the worst thing. I have 3 sets of 10, whatever. Just do a few.
Do it till you get sloppy.
Exactly. And that's what I say.
Sloppy, stop, because then you're not coping with it well. Change and do something else. Then come back and do it again.
I know. I agree.
Yeah.
But she's like, should I do 10? I'm like, okay, 10's the magic number for today. You do 10. It doesn't make a difference to me. But so I think in her brain, she needs a little structure in that regard, because I think that's how she learns. So that's where I'm at. And so I'll report back. It's, in later podcasts. I think she's will return to fencing fairly soon. I'm really thrilled for her. And it irritates me that she wasted a year about treating for a disc. And it just, I don't know, get on my soapbox, but I just feel that this poor girl loves fencing and she just did not fence for a year, or fenced in pain, basically.
Yeah. Well,
at 16, imagine how that's going to bode well when she's like 26.
Say what you want about the treatment-based classification of low back pain. But it's there for a reason. She shouldn't have been. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, just listening to the little bit that I've listened to today, I would not have chosen an extension-based program for her.
Right.
For many reasons, because she actually fits more into the category where she's going to do better with what they call stabilization. I think they've changed it now, finally.
Yeah.
The guys out of PIT to motor control or
right.
Exercise-based program, coordination, retraining, whatever you want to call it. And even maybe, more of a flexion-centered program for her in the beginning, which is what you did in the beginning with her, is let's put her in positions that make her feel better.
Yeah.
Let's get her working better in that way. And then we'll start to, and then you started challenging her going into extension and some movement stuff.
Yeah.
Control, so we have these, use the research where you have it, because the research is very clear on these treatment. I know a lot of people go, I don't want a recipe for treating. And it's like, it's not a recipe. It's a point of entry. This 16-year-old female with fired up back extensors and joints that move every which way isn't probably going to do well in an extension-based program, especially if it made her worse, which you said it did, so don't keep doing things that make people worse. Find another way.
Right.
Find the right point of entry, because the right point of entry for her could have maybe changed her path, quite a bit.
Correct. And I think that, we don't assume it, people with bilateral leg pain, especially in a 16-year-old girl, has a herniated disc.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not really smart. I'm sorry. I'm my humble opinion. So, and I think that take a look at the person in front of you. Just look at them. Look at them. Does this girl look like she has a disc problem? Does she like to sit? Sitting didn't bother her.
Of course not, because it felt better. It put her in flexion.
Exactly. Anyway. Okay. Well, this was fun. I enjoyed this one.
Yeah. This is great. Thank you for sharing.
Pleasure.
If anybody out there has any questions or comments, feel free to leave them for us. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Yes.
And, at some point in the future, we need to probably revisit a couple of our podcasts and give people some updates if they're interested.
Yes, that's a great idea.
We'll think about adding those in as we kind of move along.
Perfect. Sounds good.
All
and
right.
If anybody has any questions, you know where to reach us.
Right.
And please leave a review on iTunes. We would really appreciate it, and it would mean the world to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Erica.
Bye. Bye.